So glad that we can share this time and this space, this moment together. We will wait for our friends to log on. There are some that are running a little late today, some people that have contacted me, but we're just so happy that you can be a part of this journey with us. And so if noon is not a convenient time for you, that's okay. You can watch it at a different time. It's right on Facebook, and it will be up there, hopefully, unless it gets ripped down. But we understand that people have schedules, people have lives, people have jobs. There's a lot going on. But we just hope that you find this time to be a time of encouragement and strengthening for you, for your family, for your friends, for your church, for your world. And so that's our goal. That's our purpose. We just want to bring encouragement to you. And so if you have a Bible today, we are going to be in the book of Psalm 78. It's one of the Psalms that we will be looking at. I've been posting a verse from a Psalm each and every day for the last several weeks, and I hope that you have found that to be encouraging. And then for our midweek times, I just feel drawn to share the words that I've been sharing, feel led. We've been going through the book of Acts as a church on Sunday mornings. And again, we encourage you to be a part of our faith family. There's just a lot going on, small groups that are happening, a new Pilgrims group that's going to be starting, Pilgrims Progress group that's starting in the fall in the next few weeks. And it's primarily going to be for my East Coast friends, people that have said, I would love to be a part of this life-changing study. It's hard for me because of the time difference. So we're going to be accommodating. We're going to figure out a way to make it work. And our leader, Pastor Will, who's been leading these groups, has agreed to do an earlier time. So it will look like probably 7 o'clock New York time. If you are on the East Coast and you want to join us, maybe you're not in New York, maybe you're somewhere else, and you say, hey, I really would like to do a study with other believers on Zoom. And so we'll give you a login. We'll give you all the information that you need to be a part of the group, but also to just really flourish, to really grow. This has been a very strengthening study for our church. And almost everybody in our church, there's still some that have not been able to go through it because of time constrictions and schedules. But it's my goal, it's my hope that at some point, every single person that's a part of our Radiant Life church family will go through it. And so I know that I've been through it. Kelly, my wife, has been through it, and we have found it to be very helpful, very meaningful. So if you're interested in being a part of it, let me know. The spots fill up quickly. There'll probably be about 10 or 12 people in this next group. So I'm looking and seeing who's on here. Richard Wyra, I thought you were going to be in a lunch appointment. You should be paying attention to your lunch appointment, and you can watch this later, I guess. Now, good to see you. Shervin, good to see you. These guys are locals. They're a part of our Radiant Life church family here in San Diego. So good to see you guys. Looks like my dad is watching today, probably my mom as well. Good to see you guys watching from New York. Also, Patty and Steve. I don't know if Steve's with her, but Patty's watching from New York. My Aunt Heather is watching from New York. Good to see you guys. I think I have relatives watching from Canada, the Darling family. So glad that you guys could join us. It looks like Rich Williams is watching from New York, and it's good to see Rich on. And I don't know if Kimberly, his wife's watching with him. Rich and Kim are great friends of ours, and it's good to see you guys on. And of course, my wife is on for my support. Good to see her. She's in the other room, but I saw her just a few minutes ago, but it's good to see that she's online watching. It's also good to see that Susan is watching from Michigan, and it looks like Diane's watching. Good to see you watching from Indiana. So glad that you're watching. You know, we got a great group of people on our online faith family, and I brag about you guys all the time. Your commitment, you're here every Wednesday, you're so loyal, and you're so committed, and I applaud that. It's also good to see my great friend from Indiana watching. Luce Wilson, good to see you. Laura Hodges Anderson, she's watching, as is her mom. They're both watching. But Laura's not in Indiana. Laura is right here in San Diego. and she's watching down the road. It's so good. I'm so glad to be able to share this space with you guys. And I have a really exciting, encouraging word to share with you today, found in Psalm 78. So make your way to Psalm 78. And if you want to leave a comment, you want to talk to your friends here, we encourage that. I think it's great for us to be able to help each other find strength in the Lord. Also, let me say, as you're making your way to Psalm 78, that after Sunday morning services, which means in the evening of Sunday morning, after Sunday morning, and then Sunday evening after your football games are over, we do a time of reflection, which means that if you watch the service online, we post questions. You can post questions and comments about the message, and then we invite you back Sunday evening at 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time to discuss the message that we heard in the morning. This is crucial. This is very, very important because we get to set some faith goals for the upcoming week, and we get to process what we heard in the morning. I think more often than not, we hear a message, we say amen, we take notes, we follow along with the pastor, the teacher, whoever's teaching the message, and then we just shut our Bibles, we go home, and we get back to life, and we haven't really had time to process, to digest what we just heard. So we need to not just be hearers of the word, we also need to be doers. We need to flesh out, we need to practice what we have just heard being preached. My friend Bevan, one of my newest friends, Bevan is on today too, and I'm so glad Bevan, I met Bevan, I've said it before, but I'm just going to say it for the next couple of weeks just so that you kind of get a picture of who Bevan is. Bevan is a pistachio-loving lady. She loves Jesus, but she loves pistachios. So that might be a good book. I can maybe write, that could be my first book, Pistachios and Jesus. The two best things you can experience in life. But Bevan's watching. Thanks, Bevan, for joining us today. And she's also San Diego. So let's look at Psalm 78 together. And I've entitled this, I don't always entitle the midweek messages, but I've entitled this today, Can God Really Spread a Table in the Wilderness? That's the thought for today. Can God really spread a table in the wilderness? Out in the middle of nowhere, where nothing seems to be happening, nothing seems to be going on. Can God really make something happen? Can God make something happen in the wilderness? Can he spread a table? Can he feed people that are right in the middle of nowhere, right in the middle of the desert? And we're going to look at that today because the answer to that question is yes, he can. We have a God, who created everything that is out of nothing. That's what God had to work with. Nothing. And out of nothing didn't just come something, but out of nothing came everything. And so I just answered that question for us today. But maybe you're in a season of just wandering. Maybe it feels like you're in the wilderness. Maybe it feels like you're just out in the middle of nowhere. You don't know where God is in your life right now. You feel lost. You feel helpless. You feel desperate. You feel like something really has to happen for me to just keep my head above water because I feel like I'm sinking. I feel like I'm sinking quickly. And unless God shows up and saves the day, I'm in a lot of trouble. And that's exactly how over 1 million people felt as they are in the middle of nowhere. They have just been released. They have just been set free from captivity, from bondage, from oppression. They've been living in bondage. They've been living in captivity for over 400 years. Israel, God's people. And God frees them. You can read the story in the book of Exodus. We read in Exodus, we see Moses being the one who is called by God to lead the people out. We know that Moses was 80 years old. We know that he made all kinds of excuses why he couldn't be the man that God had created him to be, why he couldn't live out this calling. He blamed it on a speech impediment. He blamed it on his lack of influence. What if when I go to the Pharaoh and I say, let the people go, he doesn't listen to me. He doesn't respond. He doesn't let the people go. I mean, he goes on and on and on with all these excuses. Then he gets to the point in Exodus chapter 4 where he says to God, can you just please send somebody else to do it? Look, I don't want to do it. Can you send somebody else to do it? God works with Moses. He is patient with Moses as he's patient with us. And Moses becomes the mouth of God with his brother Aaron, and they go to the Pharaoh, and the people are let go. And you know, as the people are let go after this Pharaoh has hardened his heart and just refused time and time again to fulfill his promise, what he said he would do, he doesn't do it. He finally, his son, his firstborn son is struck down. And at this point, he just breaks and he says, get out of here. And so the people are fleeing. And once again, we see him changing his mind. And he sends the Egyptian army rushing after Israel. And as these Israelites are looking over their shoulder, they see this army rushing towards them. And they have no place to go. They're right at the edge of the water. And the water is deep. The water is violent. The waves are crashing. And God parts the sea. And God makes a way. It's one of the early times in Scripture that we see God making a way where there seemed like there was no way. God had the water stand up. And the ground that the Israelites traveled on, it was dry ground. Dry ground. They crossed, and as they're crossing, this Egyptian army is charging them, and the waters come down. And Egypt, the Egyptian army, is wiped out. And God's people are set free. God's people are led into the desert, but they're going towards the promised land. They took a trip that wasn't supposed to take them as long as it took them to get to where they were going. You talk about going the wrong way. You talk about doing things backwards. You talk about losing time. We've all traveled. We've all got off at the wrong exit. We've all gone too far. We know what it feels like to add extra time onto a trip. Try adding an extra 40 years onto your trip. Wandering for 40 years. They're in the middle of nowhere. And they start to reminisce about how things were when they were slaves, when they were living in bondage, the food that they would eat, and just all these, somehow they conjured up all these great memories, which there were no great memories, but they made reference to the food specifically. And as God is providing for them, they're complaining that they're thirsty, they're complaining that they're hungry, and this is kind of where we pick up this story, and what I want you to hear today, again, is can God really spread a table in the wilderness? Let's look at this together. It's a lengthy passage, about 50-something verses, but great verses, great read, and this is our reading for the day. Psalm 78, number 1, verse 1. My people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable. In other words, I will open up my mouth with a story. I will utter things, hidden things, things from of old, things we have heard and known, things our ancestors have told us. And I want you to also think about this thought today, that we have a generation that comes after us. I have kids. I hope someday that I have grandkids and that they have kids and so on and so forth. But we have a responsibility to those who come behind us. And may all who come behind us, may they find us faithful. May they find us committed to God and to God's will and God's work and God's word. Things we have heard and known, things our ancestors have told us, things that our parents have told us. We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation. Wow, that in and of itself will preach. We will tell the next generation. We will tell. We will pass it. We will pass on the torch to the next generation. The praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done, we will tell. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children, then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands. They would not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation whose hearts were not loyal. Hearts were not loyal to God, whose spirits were not faithful to him. The men of Ephraim, though armed with bows, turned back. Oh, wow. Though armed with bows, they turned back on the day of battle. Oh, may we never turn back, but may we continue to tell, may we continue to pass on what's been given to us, what's been told to us, what we have seen, what we have heard, what we have experienced, what we have witnessed in our lives. May we share that with the next generation. This group didn't do that. They didn't keep God's covenant. They refused to live by his law. It says in verse 11, they forgot what he had done. How do you forget? They forgot what he had done, the wonders he had shown them. He did miracles in the sight of their ancestors. In the land of Egypt, in the region of Zon, he divided the sea, which I talked about a minute ago, and he led them through. He made the water stand up like a wall. He guided them with the cloud by day and the light from the fire all night. He split the rocks in the wilderness, and he gave them water as abundant as the seas. He brought streams out of a rocky crag, and he made water flow down like rivers. But they continued. Even though God had done all this, they continued to sin against him, rebelling in the wilderness against the Most High. They willfully put God to the test by demanding the food they craved. They spoke against God. They said, can God really spread a table in the wilderness? True, he struck the rock and water gushed out, streams flowed abundantly, but can he also give us bread? The same God that gave them water, that provided, that made this provision, they're actually questioning, they're actually doubting. I mean, he gave us water, but can he spread a table? Can he supply meat for his people? Oh, you better believe God can supply meat for his people. When the Lord heard them, he was furious. His fire broke out against Jacob. His wrath rose against Israel, for they did not believe in God or trust in his deliverance. Let me just say this today, O people of God. We need to be a people who believe in God, not just in his existence, but really believe, really trust him, trust in his deliverance, trust in his provision, his hand of provision, a God who can make not just something, but a God who has made everything out of nothing, a God who can spread a table anywhere, a God who can make a way where there may not seem to be a way in your life, because with God, all things are possible. All things. Yet he gave a command to the skies above. Verse 23, opened up the doors of the heavens. He rained down manna for the people to eat. He gave them the grain of heaven. Human beings ate the bread of angels. He sent them all the food they could eat. He let loose the east wind from the heavens, and by his power made the south wind blow. He rained meat down on them like dust, birds like sand on the seashore. He made them come down inside their camp, all around their tents. They ate till they were gorged. He had given them what they craved. But before they turned from what they craved, even while the food was still in their mouths, God's anger rose against them, and he put to death the sturdiest among them, cutting down the young men of Israel. In spite of all this, they kept on sinning. In spite of his wonders, they did not believe. Sounds like today, doesn't it? So he ended their days in futility and their years in terror. Whenever God slew them, they would seek him. They eagerly turned to him again. Sounds like our world. Whenever there's a crisis, whenever things are falling apart, seems like our churches seem to pick up momentum again. After 9/11, churches, you couldn't find it. You couldn't find a seat in a church. All the churches were packed in that area. Across the country, churches were tripling in size because there was a crisis. And we see that here. Whenever God slew them, they would seek him. Whenever things went bad, they would seek him. They eagerly turned to him again. They remembered that God was a rock, that God Most High was a redeemer. But then they would flatter him with their mouths, lying with their tongues. How often do we just give him lip service? We don't give him life service. We give him lip service. We talk a good talk, but we don't walk a good walk. Their hearts were not loyal to him. They were not faithful to his covenant. Yet he was merciful. He forgave their iniquities. Time after time he restrained his anger and did not stir up his full wrath. He remembered that they were but flesh, a passing breeze that does not return. That's what the Bible says. We're like a mist, a vapor, here today, gone tomorrow. How often they rebelled against him in the wilderness and grieved him in the wasteland. Again and again, they put God to the test. They vexed the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember his power. The day he redeemed them from the oppressor. The day he displayed his signs in Egypt. His wonders in the region of Zon. He turned their river into blood. They could not drink from their streams. He sent swarms of flies, remember the plagues, that devoured them, frogs that devastated them. He gave their crops to the grasshopper, their produce to the locust. He destroyed their vines with hail, and their sycamore figs with sleet. He gave over their cattle to the hail, their livestock to bolts of lightning. He unleashed against them his hot anger, his wrath, indignation, and hostility, a band of destroying angels. He prepared a path for his anger. He did not spare them from death, but he gave them over to the plague, and he struck down all the firstborn of Egypt, the firstfruits of manhood in the tents of Ham. But he brought his people out like a flock. He led them like sheep through the wilderness. He guided them safely so they were unafraid. But the sea engulfed their enemies. And so he brought them to the border of his holy land, to the hill country his right hand had taken. He drove out nations before them and allotted their lands to them as an inheritance. He settled the tribes of Israel in their homes, but they put God to the test and rebelled against the Most High. They did not keep his statutes. Like their ancestors, they were disloyal and faithless. Oh, may that be a call to us. May we be loyal. May we be faithful. As unreliable as a faulty bow. That's what the ancestors looked like. Unreliable, disloyal, faithless. This aroused God's jealousy because of the idols that they had set up. When God heard them, he was furious. He rejected Israel completely. He abandoned the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent he had set up among humans. He sent the ark of his might into captivity, his splendor into the hands of the enemy. He gave his people over to the sword. He was furious with his inheritance. Fire consumed their young men, and their young women had no wedding songs. Their priests were put to the sword, and their widows could not weep. Then the Lord awoke as from sleep, as a warrior wakes from stupor of wine. He beat back the enemies. He beat back his enemies, and he put them to everlasting shame. Then he rejected the tents of Joseph. He did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but he chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loved. He built his sanctuary like the heights, like the earth that he had established forever. He chose David, his servant, took him from the sheep pens. From tending the sheep, he brought him to be a shepherd of his people Jacob, of inheritance, of Israel, his inheritance. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands. He led them. 72 verses. I gave you an extra 22. It's a lengthy passage. But what we're seeing here is we're seeing that we have a God who doesn't understand impossible, a God who desires us, a God who desires you, a God who desires me, a God who wants to be in relationship with us, a God who wants our hearts, but yet our hearts are sometimes prone to wander. We get distracted. We get distracted. We get discouraged. We get depressed. We begin to complain. We forgot what it feels like, what it means to be content in any and every situation. Thankful that God is with us, but desiring him more than anything that this world has to desire. He has to be our greatest love. We have a God who wants to take care of us, a God who can take care of us, a God who does provide, a God who does show up when it seems like we're stuck, when it feels like we're in the middle of nowhere, in this wasteland. Things just seem like they're not happening. We have a God who's able, a God who can spread a table in the wilderness, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of your nowhere. And maybe you're going through that season where it feels like nothing's happening. It's a season of depression. It's a season of doubt. I have friends that have recently struggled. I have a friend that went through a divorce. I have a friend who's struggling in the area of debt. I talk to people in my life, and I have relationships with people that are struggling, and I struggle. We all struggle. But we have a God who can show up. As difficult, as impossible as your situation may seem today, we have a God who can deliver us, a God who deserves our trust, a God who is trustworthy, a God who has never failed us. He's never failed us. Some of you are just waiting for God to fail so that you can say, yeah, he failed me. God will never fail you. God will never turn his back. He will never leave you. He says it in Hebrews, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. He will never abandon the work of his hands, which you are. Never. So no matter where you are, no matter what you're going through, I want to challenge you today to put your trust in a God who is trustworthy, a God who can deliver, a God who will deliver, a God who is faithful every step of the way. And he can spread a table. He can make everything. He has made everything. That's his resume. He's made everything from nothing. And so I encourage you today to seek this God. He's trustworthy. Our hearts are prone to wander. And maybe you've wandered away like the children of Israel, like God's people. Maybe you've chased something else. Maybe you've gone after something else and it's led you to a place where you're stuck. It's led you to a place where you're in bondage. The same God who delivered his people out of Egypt, out of captivity, can deliver you today. He can make the water stand up. He can part them. He can turn your wasteland into a land flowing with milk and honey, a place where he led his people to. It didn't have to take him that long to get there, did. And you know, that's the case with me. That's the case with you and us. Sometimes it takes us a long time to learn the lessons that God's trying to teach us. But we learn when we fall down. We learn when we fall. We learn when we fail. We do. We learn. We learn from our mistakes. We grow. When we're tempted, when we're tested, when we're tried, when we go through trials and tribulations, these are times of testing of our faith. And in that time, perseverance is created in us. It's developed in us. And the perseverance develops character. And the character develops hope. And hope doesn't disappoint us because God has poured out his love upon us. So I close with these words. Let God spread a table. Let God create a table. Let God spread a table for you today. Let him show up. He's trustworthy. He's loyal. He's committed. He'll deliver you. You can trust him. God bless you. I hope you have a wonderful week.